Your Excellency, Mr. Henry Musazizi Ariganyara, Minister of State for Finance, Planning and Economic Development of the Republic of Uganda, Chair of the Bureau of the Ministerial Segment, Chairperson of the Bureau of the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, Governors of Central Banks, specially invited guests, delegates and officials, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. As we mark the end of a week-long deliberations, I wish to commend you for having taken the time out of your busy schedules to participate in this important meeting. We have had a week of packed meetings, all centered on the key question: how to foster recovery and transformation in Africa to reduce inequalities and vulnerabilities. This helped us to zero in on levers of growth and identified our critical African priorities, namely skills enhancement, industrialization and economic diversification, infrastructure development, intra-Africa trade, innovative financing solutions, digitalization, and investment in green growth. The richness of information and the diversity of views and experiences, lessons learned and commitments undertaken were a clear indication that Africa has the capacity to chart its own path to economic recovery and transformation. We have learned from the successful implementation of pro-poor targeted policies in Egypt, anti-inflationary policies in Mauritius, homegrown policy reforms in Ethiopia, the successful establishment of the logistics hub and pharmaceutical manufacturing firm in Rwanda, that the solutions to Africa's problem lies within the continent. We have also taken note of the commitments made by our strategic partners and key stakeholders to work closely with the ECA to help African countries weather the storm and withstand the effects of successive crises. We do not take these commitments for granted. Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, let me highlight a few issues that featured prominently in the deliberations, which merit further consideration and follow-up as we depart to our respective organizations. Firstly, we saw from the evidence presented that lingering effects of the multiple crises, COVID-19, the never-ending war in Ukraine, the looming debt crisis and climate change impacts, characterize the deep and interlocking crises in Africa. Therefore, overcoming these challenges occasioned by all the overlapping crises will require African countries to formulate innovative and multifaceted strategies that provide a range of policy options. Secondly, the number of people to be lifted out of poverty and vulnerability on the continent is huge, suggesting that African countries need adequate financing to cushion the vulnerable groups while meeting its long-term development objectives. On the same note, the continent needs sufficient energy, the right infrastructure mixed, agriculture and food systems that are resilient to external shocks, and climate mitigation measures that reduce the impact of climate change. Thirdly, innovative and scalable solutions are imperative and must be developed for Africans by African countries. Investing in green sectors in Africa has significant benefits. Green and blue bonds, debt for climate investment swaps, and carbon credits offer unique opportunities to raise the resources necessary for development on the continent. Further, value addition in mining is yet another avenue for resource mobilization that has remained largely unexploited on the African continent. A just energy transition remains an imperative for the continent, and universal access to electricity and sustainable industrialization are essential for Africa's economic transformation. Similarly, the implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area continues to be the blueprint for the African pro-poor economic recovery. Certainly, there is a need to expedite the implementation of CFTA, given its innumerable benefits to member states, including resilience to shocks. We acknowledge that the harmonization of the CFTA protocols with national laws, regulations, and practices, and the domestication of the national CFTA strategies are critical for speeding up its implementation. ECA is working towards streamlining the CFTA national strategies within the UN country team's programs of work as a first step towards mainstreaming the CFTA within the UN entities. Fourthly, on management of debt crisis on the continent, I wish to reiterate that as we continue to promote and scale up inward-looking domestic resource mobilization strategies, ECA acknowledges the critical role of multilateral lending institutions and has undertaken to advance the United Nations Secretary General call for an urgent need to reform the global financial architecture to level the playing field for both low and middle-income countries. Fifthly, we have heard you on the need for ECA to deepen its collaboration with the African Union Commission, its agencies, and other Pan-African institutions in strengthening Africa's agency and undertaking joint activities, projects, and programs for Africa's development priorities. Let me assure you that ECA is committed to strengthening the collaboration with the African Union Commission, particularly on supporting the continent with strategic perspective thinking and foresight studies on how the continent can achieve prosperity by 2030 and speed up the process of realizing the objectives of both Agendas 2063 and 2030 in Africa. Sixthly, we are reminded that evidence-based policy decisions are only possible if member states have access to quality data with smart indicators. In this respect, ECA is committed to deepening support to member states in improving their data and statistical systems. Working closely with the African Union, we will continue building quality and harmonized SDG data ecosystems. Seventhly, we have taken note of the member states' suggestions to form peer learning groups to tap into the richness and diversity of innovations and successful policy interventions across the continent. ECA will be reaching out to your respective organizations with the modalities for taking these requests forward. Last but not least, as African countries pursue recovery from the above-mentioned shocks, ECA is committed to remaining a key partner in supporting member states, the African Union, regional economic communities, intergovernmental organizations, and other development partners to achieve Africa's structural transformation, social and economic recovery, and sustained growth. Guided by its medium-term program framework 2022-2025, which was endorsed at the 5th floor session of the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, ECA will support interventions around the pillars of trade, sustainable industrialization, economic diversification and regional integration, macroeconomic policy for sustainable and inclusive development, poverty, gender and social policy, private sector development, innovative financing, data, statistics and digital transformation, and climate change and the green economy. Let me conclude by expressing my gratitude once again to all of you for enduring the long working hours like the ones yesterday to deliberate on issues that are of interest to our organization, and particularly to our esteemed client, the citizens of the African continent. We are particularly indebted to our host, the Ethiopian government, for the hospitality and for making the fifth meeting of the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development a success. We have the mandate to deliver on our promise of shared prosperity to the people of Africa. We were reminded during the deliberations that sustainable solutions must be developed by Africa and that strengthened partnerships and collaboration are key in delivering to our people a transformed Africa. Let me end by challenging each one of us to rise to the occasion and ensure this century belongs to Africa. I thank you for your attention.